Stop for a moment, because this feeling you have tonight is not random. Something has been shifting around you quietly, and deep down you already know it. You may not have words for it yet, but you have felt it in the silence, in the strange heaviness that shows up when the world finally goes quiet after midnight. Lately, it has felt like life keeps pausing right when you are about to move forward. Plans stall, people grow distant, opportunities disappear without explanation. And no matter how hard you try to stay positive, there is this quiet question sitting in the back of your mind asking why everything seems delayed for you while everyone else keeps moving ahead. You have tried not to let it bother you. You told yourself to keep going, to work harder, to stay patient. But there are nights when the exhaustion catches up to you. Nights when you sit alone in your apartment with the TV running in the background just to fill the silence, staring at your phone, hoping for a message that never comes. You replay conversations in your head wondering if you said the wrong thing, made the wrong decision, trusted the wrong people. And the hardest part is that nobody really sees it. Most people only see the version of you that keeps functioning. The one that still shows up to work, still smiles when someone asks how you are doing, still says, "I'm good," even when your chest feels tight from carrying so much uncertainty. But there is another part of you that has been quietly wearing down. The part that wonders if you missed your chance somewhere along the way. The part that feels left behind every time another door closes without warning. And yet, despite all of this, something strange has been happening lately. You may have noticed moments that do not fully make sense. Times when something fell apart at the last second, but later you discovered it saved you from something worse. A canceled plan, a delayed flight, a friendship fading before betrayal could go deeper. Small moments that seemed frustrating at first, but now feel different when you look back at them. Almost like something unseen kept stepping in before your life moved in the wrong direction. Think about the times. You were absolutely certain something was meant for you, only for it to disappear overnight. At the time it felt cruel. It felt personal. But what if some of those closed doors were never punishment? What if they were protection happening in ways you could not understand yet? That is the part most people never stop long enough to consider. They assume silence means abandonment. They assume delay means failure. But sometimes silence is where unseen things begin shifting the most. Sometimes what feels like rejection is the very thing keeping your future from breaking apart before it even begins. And tonight, whether you realize it yet or not, you are standing in the middle of one of those moments right now. The strange part is that none of this happened all at once. It came slowly, almost quietly, like life was changing its direction without asking your permission first. At the beginning, you probably brushed it off as stress. A few canceled plans, a few awkward conversations, people becoming harder to reach. But after a while, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every time you got close to something you thought would finally change your life, something unexpected pulled it away. And what made it harder was how personal it started to feel. You watched other people move forward while you stayed stuck in the same emotional place, trying to understand why things kept slipping through your hands. There were mornings when you sat in your car outside work for 10 extra minutes because you did not have the energy to walk inside and pretend you were okay again. There were nights when you drove around with no destination just to escape the pressure building inside your chest. You kept replaying old decisions, wondering if your life would look different if you had said yes instead of no, stayed instead of leaving, trusted yourself instead of doubting every instinct you had. And somewhere along the way, you started believing the silence around you meant you were being forgotten. That was the dangerous part, not the delays themselves, but what they slowly convinced you to believe about your worth. Because when enough doors close in front of someone, eventually they stop knocking. You began lowering your expectations to protect yourself from disappointment. You told yourself not to get too hopeful anymore, not to get attached, not to expect good news. But even then, certain moments kept breaking through the numbness. Small moments that did not make sense at first. Like the night you almost sent a message to someone who hurt you, only for your phone battery to die right before you pressed send. Or the time you missed an exit on the highway and ended up avoiding an accident that blocked traffic for miles ahead. Tiny interruptions that felt random at the time, but stayed in your mind longer than they should have. Deep down, part of you started wondering if something had been quietly redirecting your path all along. Not loudly, not dramatically, just small shifts, subtle changes, invisible hands moving pieces before you could see the full picture. And lately, those feelings have only become stronger. You may have noticed yourself pulling away from certain people without fully understanding why. Conversations that once felt comfortable now leave you drained. Places that used to feel familiar suddenly feel heavy. Even your own routines feel different, like your spirit no longer fits inside the life you were trying so hard to hold together. That confusion has been exhausting because one part of you wants answers immediately, while another part already senses that something bigger is unfolding underneath all this uncertainty. The hardest thing about hidden change is that it does not announce itself clearly. It begins in silence. It begins in moments where nothing seems to be happening. But sometimes the most important shifts in your life start long before you can physically see the results. And what if the things leaving your life right now are not signs that everything is falling apart? What if they are signs that certain doors were never supposed to follow you into the next chapter waiting ahead of you? What made this season even more confusing was how normal everything looked from the outside. People around you probably assumed you were doing fine because you kept moving through your routine like always. You still answered emails. You still showed up to work. You still laughed during conversations, even when your mind felt somewhere else entirely. But inside, something had been unraveling quietly for a long time. It was not just disappointment anymore. It was the growing fear that maybe life was slowly passing you by while you stood still trying to understand what you were missing. You started noticing how tired you felt even after a full night of sleep. Not physical exhaustion exactly, but something deeper. A heaviness that followed you into grocery stores, into traffic lights, into quiet Sunday mornings when sunlight came through the blinds and somehow made the silence feel even louder. There were moments you almost reached out to people just so you would not feel alone with your thoughts. But then something stopped you. Not pride, not anger, just a strange feeling that certain connections no longer belonged in your life, even if letting go of them hurt more than you wanted to admit. And that realization frightened you because it meant accepting that some things were ending whether you were ready or not. One night, after another long shift, you sat alone in your apartment with takeout getting cold on the kitchen counter while rain tapped softly against the windows. Your phone lit up for a second with a notification, and for a moment your heart jumped thinking it was finally the message you had been waiting for. But it was only a store promotion, and the disappointment that hit you in that moment felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the message itself, but because it forced you to confront how badly you had been hoping for something to finally change. You leaned back in your chair staring at the ceiling wondering how life became so emotionally quiet. And that was when another thought slipped into your mind, one you had been avoiding for months. What if the silence was not empty at all? What if something was happening underneath it that you simply could not see yet? Because when you look back honestly, there were too many moments that felt strangely timed to ignore. Too many situations where things fell apart right before becoming permanent. Too many instincts warning you not to trust certain people even when everything looked fine on the surface. You remember how frustrated you felt when that one opportunity disappeared last minute after you had already started planning your future around it. At the time, it felt devastating. But weeks later you learned the company was collapsing financially and laying people off. You remember the friendship you fought so hard to keep alive, only to later realize how emotionally draining it had become. At first, every ending looked cruel. But with enough distance, some of those endings started looking more like escapes. That is the part nobody prepares you for. Sometimes protection does not feel comforting while it is happening. Sometimes it feels confusing. Sometimes it feels like loss. And maybe that is why this season has been so emotionally exhausting for you. Because deep down, part of you senses that your life is being redirected, but your mind still keeps trying to mourn the paths that disappeared before you could walk down them. The truth is, you have been carrying more fear than you let anyone see. Not loud fear, not panic, the quiet kind that follows you through ordinary moments. The kind that sits beside you while you wait at red lights, staring blankly through the windshield. The kind that wakes up with you at 3 in the morning when the apartment is completely silent and your thoughts suddenly become impossible to outrun. You started wondering whether you were slowly becoming someone unrecognizable to yourself. More distant, more guarded, less willing to believe good things could still happen for you. Because after enough disappointment, people stop expecting miracles. They stop looking for signs. They stop trusting their instincts. And without realizing it, that is exactly where you were drifting. There were days when you felt emotionally disconnected from everything around you. Friends would invite you out, and you would make excuses to stay home, because pretending to feel okay became more exhausting than being alone. Even simple conversations started feeling strange, like your mind was somewhere else while your body stayed present. You kept telling yourself you just needed rest, but deep down you knew this was something deeper than exhaustion. Something inside you was changing, and part of you was resisting it, because change often begins with loss. You remember standing in the grocery store one evening, holding two different brands of coffee, and suddenly feeling overwhelmed for no clear reason. Not because of the coffee, because your mind was carrying months of uncertainty that never fully left your body. You walked back to your car with bags in your hands and sat there without turning the engine on, staring at the rain sliding down the windshield while a strange thought crossed your mind. What if your life has been quieter lately because certain distractions needed to leave before you could finally hear what your spirit has been trying to tell you? That thought stayed with you longer than expected. Because when you looked back carefully, some of the loudest periods of your life were also the moments when you ignored your own inner warnings the most. You ignored the uneasy feeling around certain people. You ignored how drained you felt after forcing yourself into environments that no longer fit who you were becoming. You ignored the small moments where something deep inside you whispered that your path was changing. But lately those whispers have become harder to ignore. You feel it during long drives at night when the highway is nearly empty and the world feels suspended for a moment. You feel it in the silence after conversations end. You feel it when old dreams no longer excite you the same way they once did. And maybe the reason this season has felt so emotionally heavy is because part of your life is quietly ending while another part is trying to begin. Not dramatically, not all at once. Slowly, carefully, like pieces being moved behind the scenes before the full picture becomes visible. That is why some things around you suddenly feel unstable. Not because you are being abandoned, but because certain attachments can no longer follow you where your life is shifting next. And the difficult part is that while this change is happening internally, the outside world still expects you to act like everything makes perfect sense. But it does not make sense yet. Not completely. All you know is that something keeps interrupting the old version of your life every time you try to force yourself back into it. What you did not realize at first was how much energy you had been spending trying to hold together things that were already quietly falling apart. You kept trying to return to old versions of yourself because they felt familiar, even when they no longer felt right. You tried recreating routines that once made you feel safe. You reopened conversations that should have stayed closed. You kept revisiting memories hoping they would suddenly feel different. But every attempt left you feeling emptier than before, as if something inside you was refusing to move backward no matter how badly your mind wanted certainty again. That inner conflict started showing up everywhere. You would sit across from people during dinner and suddenly feel disconnected from the conversation halfway through. You would scroll through old photos late at night wondering why moments that once meant everything now felt strangely distant. Even places you used to love began carrying a quiet heaviness that you could not explain. And the hardest part was that nobody around you fully understood what was happening because externally your life still looked normal. But internally, you were standing between two versions of yourself, and neither one felt stable anymore. One Saturday afternoon, you drove across town just to clear your head. The sky was gray, the kind of weather that makes everything feel slower. You stopped at a gas station off the highway, grabbed a coffee, and sat back in your car watching people come and go while an old song played softly through the speakers. And for a moment, everything became painfully clear. You realized how long you had been waiting for someone else to explain your life back to you. Waiting for another person to validate your worth. Waiting for a breakthrough to finally prove your suffering meant something. But deep down, another realization was beginning to surface beneath the sadness. Maybe the reason things felt so unstable was because you were no longer meant to build your identity around people, places, or plans that could disappear overnight. That thought unsettled you because it meant facing how much of your peace had depended on external things staying exactly the same. And lately, life had been stripping away every false sense of control you thought you had. Relationships shifted unexpectedly. Certain opportunities dissolved before they could fully begin. Conversations started revealing truths people had hidden from you for a long time. At first it felt unfair, but slowly another pattern emerged. Every painful shift exposed something you previously refused to see clearly. Every disappointment uncovered a hidden truth beneath the surface. It was as if life kept removing illusions one layer at a time. And while that process hurt deeply, part of you could no longer deny that some of those illusions would have eventually destroyed your peace if they had remained. That is why the silence around you has felt so intense lately. Silence forces hidden things to surface. It reveals where your trust has been misplaced. It reveals which connections drain your spirit instead of strengthening it. And sometimes it reveals how exhausted you have become from pretending you are not hurting. There is a reason certain distractions have stopped working on you the way they once did. A reason your soul feels restless even during moments that used to comfort you. Something inside you is waking up slowly, and the more it awakens, the harder it becomes to ignore what no longer belongs in your life. That is why this season feels both painful and strangely necessary at the same time. There was one night that stayed with you more than the others. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because something inside you shifted in a way you still cannot fully explain. It was late, sometime after midnight, and the city outside your apartment had gone mostly quiet except for the distant sound of traffic moving through wet streets after the rain. You had been sitting on the edge of your couch for nearly an hour with the lights off, your phone in your hand, rereading old messages you should have deleted months ago. Part of you was trying to understand where everything started falling apart. Another part of you already knew there was no answer hidden inside those conversations anymore. You remember feeling emotionally exhausted in a way that sleep could not fix. Not angry, not hopeless, just deeply tired from carrying invisible weight for so long. And in that silence, you almost reached out to someone from your past again. You typed the message slowly, staring at the screen while your chest tightened with uncertainty. You wanted comfort, familiarity, some sign that you had not lost as much as it felt like you had. But before you sent it, something made you stop. It was not fear exactly, more like a quiet resistance deep inside yourself. A feeling that returning to certain people would only return you to versions of yourself you were finally beginning to outgrow. So you set the phone down without sending anything and walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. And that was when something strange happened. Nothing supernatural, nothing dramatic. Just a moment of unexpected clarity that seemed to settle over the room without warning. You suddenly realized how many times you had ignored your own inner discomfort just to avoid being alone. How many times you accepted half-hearted connections because silence scared you more than disappointment. How often you forced yourself to stay in situations your spirit had already outgrown simply because starting over felt too uncertain. That realization hit harder than you expected because it exposed something painful but true. Some of the things you were grieving were not actually healthy for you anymore. You were grieving familiarity. You were grieving comfort. You were grieving the version of life you thought you were supposed to have by now. And for the first time in a long time, you stopped blaming yourself for feeling lost. Because maybe confusion was never proof that you were failing. Maybe it was proof that your old life no longer fit who you were becoming. After that night, small things began feeling different. You started noticing how your body reacted around certain people. Some conversations left you feeling strangely drained for hours afterward. Certain environments suddenly felt heavy the moment you walked into them. Meanwhile, moments of solitude that once felt unbearable started bringing small flashes of peace you had not felt in a very long time. Quiet morning drives, early sunlight through the window before work. Sitting alone with coffee while the world outside slowly woke up. Tiny moments, but they carried a stillness that felt more honest than anything you had been chasing before. And even though you still did not fully understand where your life was heading, something deep inside you had started recognizing that not every closed door was meant to be reopened. Some things ended because they could not follow you into the next version of your life that was already beginning to form underneath all this uncertainty. Even after all of those realizations, part of you still believed the waiting meant you had somehow failed. That was the battle happening quietly inside you every day. One side of you was beginning to sense that your life was being redirected for a reason, while the other side kept looking at the delays as proof that you were falling behind everyone else. And honestly, there were moments when that fear felt impossible to ignore. You would open social media and see people announcing engagements, new homes, promotions, vacations, new beginnings, while your own life still felt suspended somewhere between endings and unanswered questions. You smiled for them, but afterward you would sit there in silence wondering why your own path felt so uncertain. Why everything around you seemed unfinished. Why every time you thought something stable was finally beginning, it slipped away before becoming real. The hardest part was not the waiting itself. It was the feeling that maybe you had already missed your moment without realizing it. There were nights you lay awake replaying old choices in your head like scenes from a movie you could not stop watching. What if you had stayed longer? What if you had spoken up sooner? What if one different decision could have changed everything? Your mind kept searching for the exact moment life supposedly went wrong. But deep down, another quieter voice kept asking a different question entirely. What if things did not go wrong at all? What if the paths disappearing from your life were never truly meant to hold your future? That question unsettled you because accepting it meant letting go of the belief that every loss was your fault. And for a long time, blaming yourself felt easier than facing uncertainty. At least guilt gave you the illusion of control. But uncertainty forced you to trust something you could not yet fully see. One evening after work, you stopped at a small diner you used to visit years ago. The place was nearly empty except for an older couple sitting quietly near the window and a waitress refilling coffee cups behind the counter. You slid into the booth, exhausted, staring absent-mindedly at the neon sign glowing outside through the glass. And while waiting for your food, you overheard part of a conversation from the booth behind you. A man was telling someone how devastated he felt after losing a job years earlier, only to later realize it was the exact thing that pushed him toward the life he truly needed. The strange thing was not the conversation itself. It was how deeply those words landed inside you at that exact moment. Almost like they reached a place in your spirit you had been trying to ignore for months. You sat there quietly after that, barely touching your food, realizing how many times your life had already been redirected without you understanding it in the moment. The relationships that ended before they damaged you further. The opportunities that disappeared before they trapped you somewhere unhealthy. The delays that frustrated you, but quietly kept you from becoming someone emotionally disconnected from yourself. And suddenly, something began cracking inside the fear you had been carrying. Maybe the waiting was never evidence that you were forgotten. Maybe it was evidence that parts of your story were still being rearranged in ways you could not yet fully understand. Because if everything you once wanted had happened exactly when you demanded it, you might have ended up building your entire future on foundations that were never stable to begin with. That realization changed something inside you, even if only slightly at first. For the first time in a long time, you stopped seeing every delay as evidence that life was working against you. And once that shift began, memories started returning differently. Not as failures anymore, but as warnings you only understood after surviving them. You thought back to the relationship you once begged to keep alive. The one that consumed so much of your emotional energy that you barely recognized yourself near the end of it. At the time, losing that person felt unbearable. You convinced yourself that if things had worked out differently, you would finally feel secure, finally feel chosen, finally feel enough. But now, looking back honestly, you can see how much of yourself you were abandoning just to avoid being left behind. You ignored your exhaustion. You ignored your anxiety. You ignored the way your spirit kept tightening every time you forced yourself to accept less than what your heart truly needed. And when that relationship ended, it shattered you for a while. There were nights you sat alone on the floor of your apartment replaying every conversation, trying to understand how someone who once made you feel so seen could suddenly feel so distant. But months later, truths slowly surfaced that you could not see before. Patterns you overlooked, red flags you minimized, ways you were shrinking yourself emotionally just to maintain a connection that was quietly draining your peace. That was when another realization hit you harder than expected. If that relationship had continued, it would not have healed your loneliness. It would have deepened it. The same thing happened in other areas of your life too. Opportunities you once mourned eventually revealed hidden instability underneath them. People you once trusted exposed intentions that no longer aligned with who you were becoming. And suddenly, the delays you hated so much started looking different. Because if certain doors had opened exactly when you demanded them to, you would have walked straight into situations that would have disconnected you even further from yourself. That is the part nobody talks about when life feels quiet and uncertain. Protection rarely feels comforting in the moment. Sometimes it feels like confusion. Sometimes it feels like disappointment. Sometimes it feels like sitting alone at 1:30 in the morning wondering why everything keeps slipping away while everyone else seems to be moving forward effortlessly. But maybe some of those closed doors were never punishment. Maybe they were interruptions designed to stop you from building your future around things that could never truly hold you together. And lately, you have started sensing that something else is changing too. Not externally yet. Internally. The panic that once controlled your thoughts every night has started losing some of its power. You still feel uncertainty, but it no longer feels exactly the same. There are moments now where stillness does not scare you as much as it used to. Moments where silence feels less empty and more like space being created for something new to eventually enter your life. Even your intuition feels sharper lately. You notice things sooner. You feel energy differently around people. Certain conversations instantly drain you while others unexpectedly bring peace. It is almost as if the version of you that depended on external validation is slowly fading away, even though the process still feels uncomfortable. And maybe that discomfort is necessary because the life waiting ahead of you requires a version of yourself that no longer settles for what only looks good on the surface while quietly damaging your spirit underneath. What began unsettling you the most was realizing how many people around you only understood the version of you that benefited them. That truth did not arrive all at once. It surfaced slowly through little moments you almost ignored at first. Conversations where you felt unheard even while speaking. Friendships where you carried the emotional weight alone. Situations where people seemed comfortable receiving your energy but disappeared the moment you needed support yourself. And once you started noticing those patterns, it became impossible to unsee them. You began understanding why your spirit felt exhausted around certain individuals even when nothing openly negative was happening. Some people were connected to who you used to be, not who you were becoming. That realization hurt because part of you still wanted everyone to come with you into this next season of your life. But the deeper your awareness grew, the more obvious it became that not every connection was built to survive your transformation. There was a night not long ago when you met someone for dinner after months of barely speaking. Before, being around them always felt comfortable and familiar. But this time something felt different almost immediately. They talked the entire evening about surface-level things while completely missing the quiet exhaustion sitting behind your eyes. You smiled through the conversation, nodded at the right moments, laughed when expected, but deep down you realized something painful. You had spent years shrinking your deeper thoughts just to maintain connections that never truly saw you completely. Driving home afterward, you rolled the windows down despite the cold air because your chest felt tight with emotion you could not fully explain. And somewhere during that drive, another truth surfaced. The loneliness you feared so much was not created by solitude. It was created by spending too much time in spaces where your spirit felt unseen. That realization changed the way you looked at everything. Suddenly, certain endings no longer felt cruel. They felt necessary. Because the more clearly you began seeing people, the more you understood how often your intuition tried to warn you long before situations collapsed. You ignored discomfort because you wanted things to work. You ignored emotional distance because you feared starting over. You ignored the quiet feeling in your stomach telling you certain paths were leading somewhere empty. But now those inner warnings feel louder than ever. And strangely enough, the same silence that once terrified you has started protecting you from rushing back into places your soul already outgrew. That is why things have felt so emotionally intense lately. You are not just grieving lost opportunities anymore. You are grieving illusions. Illusions about who people were. Illusions about what success would fix inside you. Illusions about what your life was supposed to look like by now. And illusions are painful to lose because they once gave you comfort. But once they break apart, clarity begins entering places confusion used to control. That clarity is changing the way you move through the world now. You notice when something feels forced. You notice when peace disappears around certain people. You notice how drained you become after pretending to be someone you no longer are. And although this awareness still feels uncomfortable, it is also quietly setting you free from patterns that would have kept you emotionally trapped for years if they had continued unnoticed. The truth is, some of the delays that frustrated you the most were actually buying time for your eyes to finally open before you built your future around the wrong people, the wrong environments, and the wrong version of yourself. And that is when the shift truly began, Not in some dramatic moment where everything suddenly changed overnight, but quietly, almost invisibly, inside the way you started seeing yourself. You stopped chasing certain people for reassurance. You stopped forcing conversations that always left you emotionally drained afterward. You stopped needing immediate answers for every uncertain thing happening in your life. At first, those changes felt unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because so much of your identity had been tied to seeking validation from external things. But slowly, without fully realizing it, you began reclaiming pieces of yourself that had been scattered across years of overthinking, waiting, and emotional survival. You noticed it in small moments first. The way you no longer checked your phone every 5 minutes hoping for someone to finally choose you. The way silence no longer automatically convinced you something was wrong. The way certain memories stopped controlling your emotions the way they once did. There were still hard nights, of course. Still moments where loneliness crept back in unexpectedly while driving home from work or sitting alone with your thoughts after midnight. But even during those moments, something felt different now. The fear was losing its grip on you. You started understanding that healing does not always arrive as happiness right away. Sometimes healing begins as clarity. Sometimes it begins as finally recognizing what your spirit can no longer tolerate. One morning before sunrise, you woke up earlier than usual without knowing why. The apartment was completely still, the sky outside barely beginning to lighten. You made coffee and sat quietly near the window wrapped in a blanket, watching the city slowly wake up beneath the pale blue morning light. And for the first time in months, your mind was not racing. There were no imaginary conversations replaying in your head. No desperate need to figure everything out immediately. Just stillness, honest stillness. And sitting there in that silence, you realized something important. The version of yourself who once begged for certain doors to open would not even feel at peace walking through them anymore. That realization almost shocked you because it revealed how much you had already changed internally without noticing it day by day. The things you once thought would save you no longer carry the same emotional power over you. The approval you used to crave feels less important now. The people you feared losing no longer define your worth the way they once did. It is not that you suddenly stopped caring. It is that your soul has been slowly learning the difference between attachment and peace. And once you begin understanding that difference, you can never fully return to who you used to be before. That is why your life has felt so emotionally strange lately. One part of you is grieving old attachments while another part is quietly stepping into deeper emotional freedom. And freedom often feels unfamiliar before it feels beautiful. Sometimes it even feels lonely at first because you are no longer distracting yourself the way you once did. But underneath that loneliness, something else has started growing. Self-awareness, discernment, emotional strength, the ability to sense when something aligns with your peace and when it quietly steals it away from you. That is the shift happening now, even if the outside world has not caught up to it yet. Your life is no longer being built around desperation, fear, or emotional survival. Something deeper has started taking root inside you, and it is changing the direction of your future long before the visible results fully appear. The deeper truth you are beginning to understand is that the old version of you could never carry the life that is slowly trying to emerge now. That version of you survived by overextending yourself for people who rarely gave the same energy back. It survived by constantly seeking reassurance, constantly questioning your worth based on who stayed and who left. It survived by trying to control outcomes because uncertainty felt unbearable. But somewhere through all the waiting, all the silence, and all the disappointment, something inside you began changing at the root. You became more aware of what drains your spirit, more aware of how easily peace disappears when you betray your own instincts just to avoid feeling alone, more aware that constantly chasing acceptance was slowly disconnecting you from yourself. And even though this transformation has been painful, it has also been reshaping your entire emotional foundation in ways you are only now beginning to recognize. There was a time when every unanswered message would ruin your entire evening. Every delayed opportunity would send your mind into panic. Every shift in someone's energy toward you would make you question your value. But lately, even though those moments still affect you, they no longer completely consume you the way they once did. That change did not happen overnight. It happened through countless quiet nights where you were forced to sit with yourself without distractions, It happened during lonely drives home when you realized nobody else could give you the peace you kept searching for externally. It happened through heartbreak, disappointment, silence, and endings that forced you to stop building your identity around temporary things. One afternoon while cleaning your apartment, you found an old notebook tucked away inside a drawer. Inside were pages filled with goals, plans, and prayers you wrote years earlier. As you flipped through them, you barely recognized the person who wrote those words. Not because the dreams were wrong, but because so many of them were built around proving your worth instead of protecting your peace. You sat there on the floor quietly for a while, realizing how desperately your younger self believed achievement, relationships, or validation would finally heal the emptiness inside. But now, after everything you have walked through, you understand something differently. Peace cannot be built on unstable foundations. And maybe that is why so many things had to fall apart first. Not to punish you, but to separate you from versions of yourself that were emotionally dependent on things that could disappear overnight. That separation felt brutal at times, because growth often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. But look at how much stronger your awareness has become because of it. You notice manipulation faster now. You recognize emotional exhaustion before it completely consumes you. You trust your intuition more. You no longer confuse chaos with passion or attention with genuine connection. That wisdom came through experience, through tears nobody saw, through silent moments where it felt like life was stripping everything familiar away from you one piece at a time. And maybe that was necessary because the future waiting for you requires emotional stability that the old version of you did not yet have. It requires discernment, patience, inner peace, the ability to walk away from what looks good on the surface but quietly damages your spirit underneath. That is why this season has felt so uncomfortable. You are not just watching your life change externally. You are watching an entire identity slowly dissolve so something healthier can finally take its place. Now, when you look back at everything that once felt confusing, painful, or unfair, you can finally see the deeper pattern connecting it all. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to understand that your life was never as abandoned as it once felt in those long silent nights. There was something guiding you even through the uncertainty, even through the delays that nearly broke your confidence. You see it now in the moments that once looked meaningless, the canceled plans that redirected your future, the relationships that ended before they could damage you beyond repair, the opportunities you cried over losing that eventually revealed hidden instability beneath them. At the time, every closed door felt personal. But now you realize some of those doors closed because your spirit was being protected from paths that would have pulled you further away from yourself. And strangely enough, the more you accept that truth, the lighter your heart has started to feel. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because you are no longer fighting reality the way you once did. You are no longer exhausting yourself trying to force old chapters to reopen. There is peace beginning to grow inside you now. Quiet peace, the kind that does not need constant reassurance to survive. One evening recently, while driving home just after sunset, you caught yourself doing something you had not done in a long time. You were simply present. No racing thoughts, no replaying old mistakes, no obsessing over who left or what never happened. You were just watching the orange light stretch across the highway while music played softly through the speakers, and for a brief moment, you realized your mind finally felt still. That moment may seem small to someone else, but to you it meant everything because you remembered how chaotic your thoughts used to feel almost every hour of the day. And in that stillness, another truth settled quietly into your spirit. You survived things that once convinced you they would destroy your future. You survived loneliness that made you question your worth. You survived seasons where silence felt unbearable and uncertainty followed you everywhere. But somehow, piece by piece, you kept moving forward even when you did not fully understand why certain things had to happen the way they did. And maybe that is the clearest sign of all that your life has been guided more carefully than you realized while you were inside the confusion. Because looking back now, you can see how many times your path shifted right before something unhealthy became permanent. You can see how your spirit kept resisting environments that no longer aligned with who you were becoming. You can see how every painful separation forced you to rediscover parts of yourself you abandoned while trying to earn love, approval, or certainty from the wrong places. That understanding changes the way you see your future now. You no longer need every answer immediately, because you finally understand that clarity often arrives after the protection has already taken place. And maybe that is why this season feels different from the others. Not because all the uncertainty is gone, but because fear is no longer controlling the way you interpret every delay. Deep down, you know now that some things had to end so your peace could survive. Some doors had to stay closed because the life waiting ahead of you requires a version of yourself that no longer betrays its own spirit just to avoid temporary loneliness. And maybe tonight, for the first time in a long while, you do not need to force yourself to understand every unanswered question before allowing your heart to rest. Maybe that is the quiet lesson this entire season has been trying to teach you. Not everything meaningful arrives with immediate clarity. Some things only make sense after you survive them. After enough time passes for you to finally see what was protecting you while you were busy mourning what you thought you lost. You spent so long believing your life was falling behind because certain doors stayed closed, because certain people walked away, because plans dissolved before becoming real. But now, standing where you are emotionally, you can feel how much those endings changed you in ways that could never have happened if everything worked out exactly when you wanted it to. You are calmer now, even if your future still feels uncertain sometimes. More aware, more careful with your energy, more honest with yourself about what truly brings peace and what only creates temporary distraction. And that change matters more than you realize because peace built slowly from within lasts longer than excitement built on unstable foundations. There will still be nights when old fears try returning. Moments when loneliness briefly whispers that you are still behind. Moments when silence feels heavier than usual and uncertainty creeps back into your thoughts while driving home through dark streets or lying awake after midnight listening to the sound of rain against the windows. But even then, something inside you knows now that silence does not always mean abandonment. Sometimes silence is simply space. Space for healing. Space for redirection. Space for parts of your life to realign before the next chapter fully arrives. You no longer need to chase every opportunity just because it appears. You no longer need to hold on to every connection simply because it once felt familiar. Some things were only meant to walk beside you temporarily, teaching you lessons your spirit needed before continuing forward. And although releasing those attachments hurt deeply at the time, you can now feel how much lighter your soul has become without constantly carrying things that were quietly exhausting you. One night soon, maybe sooner than you expect, you are going to look around your life and realize how far you have actually come emotionally. Not because everything became perfect overnight, but because you finally stopped abandoning yourself in order to keep other people comfortable. You finally stopped interpreting every delay as failure. You finally stopped begging closed doors to reopen when your spirit already sensed they no longer belonged in your future. And when that moment comes, the peace you feel will not be loud or dramatic. It will be quiet, steady, honest, like sunlight entering a room slowly after a long storm finally passes. Right now, you may still be standing somewhere between what ended and what has not fully arrived yet. That space can feel uncomfortable sometimes, but it is not empty. Things are still unfolding beneath the surface in ways you cannot completely see yet. The clarity you needed has already begun finding you little by little through every difficult realization, every lonely night, every unexpected redirection that slowly guided you back toward yourself. And maybe that is the most important thing to understand tonight. Your life was never ruined by the doors that closed. In many ways, those closed doors were the reason your spirit survived long enough to finally become who you were always meant to grow into.